Okay, runners, we're going to talk about one of the most important pieces of equipment that you can have. No, it's not that, although those shoes are important. We're going to talk today about socks. There are three types of materials that socks tend to get made with. The first one is cotton. Now, cotton is nice because it feels soft and it is highly absorbent, but when it's absorbent, what it does is just holds on to that moisture and doesn't let it dissipate anywhere or evaporate anywhere. And so really you're just keep running in the same sweat that you're accumulating as you're wearing that pair of socks. So a sock is really like a dirty dish sponge. So the only way to get rid of the water is to squeeze it really hard and all that water comes out. So basically you're just running in a dirty dish sponge when you're running in cotton socks. So that's why we have a saying that cotton is rotten. Another thing about cotton socks is they break down really fast when you're using them and washing and drying them a lot. And they get really pilly and rough on the inside. So not only are you running in a dirty dish sponge, but you're running in a rough, dirty dish sponge. And that's going to give you blisters and all sorts of foot problems. Now, the second type of material are synthetic socks. And synthetic socks are great because they do stay drier. They are made of things like polyester, and they come in brand names like Drymax and Coolmax. And they're great because they'll wick moisture away and help you stay dry, but they don't actually absorb a lot of moisture. And because they don't absorb a lot of moisture, you're still swimming around a lot of the sweat you have in your shoe. And they tend to hold on a lot of that smell. And if you've noticed that shirts and athletic apparel made out of polyester tend to smell a lot more just because it's so hard to get anything out of that. Here's another thing about synthetic fabrics. Do you know that every 25 minutes in this world, a full Olympic-sized swimming pool of oil is used to produce the synthetic fabrics for clothing that's used around the world? That adds up to almost 350 million barrels of oil used every year just to make the clothes we wear. Gross. So finally, let's talk about wool. Wool's a great material because it's natural and sustainable, and it comes from this dude. Here's the thing about wool. It is just as absorbent as cotton. It wicks and dries just as good or better than synthetic materials. And it's also a natural antimicrobial fabric, meaning that it kills bacteria and the things that cause stink and smell in your socks. So isn't that great? So I found a lot of people who have trouble with their shoes smelling really bad. All they do is wear wool socks and it totally goes away. Another thing about wool is it's a temperature regulating fabric. So not a lot of people think, well, it's going to keep you hot in the summer, but it's not. So again, ask this dude. He's just as comfortable in the summer as he is in the winter because wool regulates the temperature. And finally, what people say about wool is that they're allergic to it. The one thing that you could be allergic to in wool is called lanolin, which is an oil that's on wool, but all the lanolin is stripped out in the manufacturing process. So what's left is really just the wool fibers. And the thing about wool fibers is there's a whole range of wool fibers. So when people get really itchy and scratchy from wool, it's usually because they're not using a really great wool. So there's things like merino wool and alpaca wool, which is a really soft, high-grade wool. When you look at wool under a microscope, the kind of cheap wool that you might buy at cheap stores or in bulk is really flaky and it looks really scratchy, where the really nice wool, like merino wool, looks very fine and soft. It's kind of like Fabio's hair, if you know who Fabio is. So that's why wool is one of the greatest fabrics to wear. And if you're like me, you upgrade that even more and you get some of these, which is a pair of wool toe socks made by the brand called Injinji. And those go in the nooks and crannies between your toes and help keep your feet completely dry. So that's my recommendation because it's going to be wet for most of the year in Pacific Northwest. Wool will do the best in terms of dealing with the cold and dealing with the wet and making sure your feet don't get blistered and chafed.